This is episode 86 with Austin Belcak.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Bryan Teare.
In the beginning, you're gonna suck. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Bryan Teare, and those were my words on the recent Virtual Career Mastery Summit hosted by my good friend, Austin Belcak. Now, before I get into today's episode, a shout out to our sponsor. It is Rooster, the alarm clock app that allows you to wake up to an alarm of your choice rather than that boring old tone that you're hitting snooze on way too often. This can be inspiring channels such as the one from myself. It could be news headlines, sports headlines, meditation tracks, or anything else you choose. So make sure you head on over to the Google Play Store or the Apple Store and pick up the Rooster alarm clock app. Now, onto today's episode, and Austin is the founder of Cultivated Culture, where he helps people land the career of their dreams and make more money while they're at it. But things weren't always this way. Just a few years ago, Austin was making close to nothing at a job he hated in a small town. Not a winning combo. He was putting 1,500 miles on his car every week, could barely afford to eat ramen for breakfast, and was swimming in over $10,000 of credit card debt. He became fascinated by why and how others his age were working at these world-class companies, buying their own apartments, and traveling all around the world. For the next 12 months, he researched every aspect of the recruiting process for top companies and then went through it himself. He went to over 50 interviews at companies like Google, Twitter, and Uber, and in the end, he secured a dream job and now helps others do the same without needing to have connections or qualifications needed for the job. Now, Austin recently put on the Virtual Career Mastery Summit, which I mentioned earlier, and this episode is my interview on the summit, which was an online event with leading entrepreneurs and thought leaders designed to help you take control of your career. Now, in today's episode, you're going to learn how my mentor called me out, why you need to take action before having it all figured out, the two things that separate those who make it from those who don't, why social media can be your worst enemy and how to turn your smartphone into a dumb phone, why you need to stop looking for your passion, and why quitting is actually your friend when exploring new ideas. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at bryanteare.com/086. But for now, let's go hang out with Austin. Hey, Austin, thank you so much for having me on the summit, and hello to everyone watching.
And I'm so glad you're here all the way from South Africa, too. It's fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, the Quarter Life Comeback, and what that's all about.
Yeah, I guess how much time do we have? I guess I'll start with the background story. And I grew up like I'm sure a lot of people do in our generation, followed all the rules, did really well academically and sportingly. And kind of, I did everything that we're told to do. Work hard, get a good job, get good grades. And I found myself in a good job for 2.5 years. And I suddenly realized that I wasn't really fulfilled in that job or happy. And up till that point, it kind of been like almost on autopilot or on a conveyor belt. And I'd never really taken a second to step back and ask myself, like, am I doing what I really want to be doing like one day down the line? And, a good metric that I've learned in the time since is like, take a look at your boss and ask yourself, like, is that the type of role or type of position that you want to be in? And if it's not, like, what are you actually working towards? Unless you're in your position to develop skills and network and that kind of thing before taking a step somewhere else. And we're diving into things really quickly here. But pretty much I got to that point. And around the same time, I'd started watching things and reading things online and came across people who were doing things that they really loved and making an income doing it. And I started to realize, well, like there isn't only this one way that I'd been taught. We can do things completely differently. And so I was at work the one day, and I sent my dad a text, very personal. And I said, rewinding even before then, I was at my 25th birthday party. I'm a twin, so my twin brother and I had a birthday party. And all my friends were saying how, work sucks and they hate their jobs, but, it's good money or it pays the bills at the end of the month. So we just kind of have to deal with it. And right as they were saying that, I kind of piped up and I said, yeah, I know if I could resign now, I would. And just a little backstory there, because I had got good grades at university, I had a bursary with my company for the first 2 years of my employment. But at this party, I was in my second month of my third year. So I was out of that sort of payback period. And I realized that I could. And, I think there were a few more days at work feeling this way. And I would wake up in the morning, be like, got to go to work. And then when I was at work, I would keep looking at my watch, like 7 hours left, 6 hours left, which is a terrible place to be in. And I'm sure a lot of the people watching this can relate. And anyway, so I found myself at work one day, and I really couldn't handle this feeling anymore, feeling like there was way more to life than what I was experiencing, knowing that I was capable of a lot more and making a bigger impact. And I thought, I'm really young. I was 25 at the time. I'm 28 now. And I thought, I'm way too young to be in a position that I'm not excited about. I didn't have any debt or any kind of dependence or like a wife or kids like I do now at the time. And so I just thought to myself, if I'm going to take a big risk, like now's the time to do that. And I sent a text to my dad. I said, Dad, I think you might know what this is about, but I'm thinking of resigning. And I was terrified what he would say, because both my dad and my mom are both very old school. And I thought they were going to say, just stop being just another entitled millennial, or like, welcome to the real world. This is reality. And instead, my dad said something to me that basically changed the course of my life. And he said, I joke now that I think my dad's a bit of a guru, but he said to me, if you're not happy, you're not growing, and you're not adding value to your company, the right thing to do is to move on. But not enough people do, because it's too safe and easy to just cash your check at the end of the month and, make the money and carry on with it. And within half an hour, within 30 minutes, I'd handed in my letter of resignation with no plan B, which I tell people now I don't recommend. But I'd got to this point where I couldn't handle it anymore, and I knew that I would figure something out. That's just the type of person I am. And then once I was a free man, my dad again, he said, well, are you going to travel now or something? And I think he thought I'd go to Europe for 2 weeks. I ended up going to Asia for 2 months, and just with a bag on my back, no check-in luggage, just hand luggage. And although I didn't set out with any sort of plans or any mission for while I was away, when I was away, I kind of figured out, that's the beauty of traveling, is you see things from a different perspective, and you get away from your typical conveniences and comfort zones. And I figured out that the thing that I'd always enjoyed the most since I was 5 or 6 years old was helping other people, and helping other people improve their lives or improve the way they were doing things. And, a silly example, and you often hear people say, like, what do you enjoy doing when you were young? But hardly ever do we take a second to, step back and really answer some of those questions. And I remember the furthest back I can remember helping people or wanting to help people was when I was in preschool, and someone would fall out of a tree or trip over or something. I would run over to them and find out if they were okay or if I could help them. And it sounds like a silly example, but those are the little things you need to take, be aware of. And so when I came back from that traveling, I became a personal trainer. Health and fitness was something I was really passionate about, and I decided to experiment and explore that. And I did that for a while, and it wasn't quite the thing. And a friend of mine, Smiley Pozwalski, he talks about, when I interviewed him, he talks about, the career lily pads, not the career ladder. So you're not climbing up a steady line. It's kind of like jumping from thing to thing, but you're still making forward progress. And anyway, so the personal training was, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't quite the thing. And that led to more health coaching. And then that led to the life coaching stuff, which is pretty much what I'm doing now, although I am, again, taking another leap in a lily pad, I think, as we speak, into more high performance and personal mastery kind of stuff. But that's kind of how I got to that. And then I don't know if you want to speak about where the podcast came in. We can do that if you feel like it's the right time.
Definitely. Before we jump in, I just want to touch on a few things you mentioned. I think I really love the Quarter Life Comeback message and the idea behind it, because I think a lot of us at one point or another, most people don't end up in a job out of college or even a couple years out of college in their first few jobs that they love and they want to be in for the rest of their life. I think most people, especially people who are watching this, may not be as happy with their situation, but it can be hard to know what that next step is, right? And I agree with you. I don't think that you should necessarily jump into something without a plan B, or maybe let go of something without a plan B. But at the same time, it's hard to figure out what that next step is. And that's, I think, where the quarter life crisis sort of comes into play. So I'm really glad you touched on that. But also you mentioned the comforts of kind of staying at a job, regardless of whether your boss sucks or you hate the work or the people aren't great or whatever, because it's comfortable. And I was actually just on vacation with a couple buddies, and like a mutual friend was talking about how she, like, all of the people at her company were leaving. They were going to places like Microsoft, Google, or whatever. And I was like, well, I've known her for a while. I was like, if you want, I'll give you a referral into Microsoft. And she's like, oh, thanks so much. But, I know my company very well. And I'm like, I wouldn't want to like jump into something new and unknown. And I was like, all right, well, we've just been talking for 15 minutes about how, you don't think you're not making enough, and it's boring and everybody's jumping ship and you kind of want to, but then now I give you the opportunity to do something about it. And suddenly it's like, that maybe actually am kind of comfortable, and I don't know. And I think a lot of people deal with that. Right. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I think a lot of people who do end up in situations like yourself or myself or a lot of the other speakers on this summit, one of the things that we all have in common is that we were willing to take that leap of faith. So I think that's a good message for everybody listening. I would love to hear more about the podcast, how that got started, how this idea of the Quarter Life Comeback turned into something that you've been able to find as a point of commonality across all the speakers, and something that's obviously resonated with a lot of people because you have a great audience.
Yeah, definitely. And basically, I'd had a health blog before when I was doing more health coaching and personal training stuff. And right near the end of that, because I was listening to a few podcasts at the time, I thought this could be quite fun. And again, this message of experimenting pops up. And I decided to try in my own podcast to see how it is. And actually, it was a mentor of mine at the time who ran quite a big health blog herself. And I was telling her for a while that I'd thought about starting a podcast. Again, this is my first podcast, which was more of an experiment. And she asked me about it, and she confronted me. And I said to her, this thing and that thing, and like, I don't think I'm quite ready yet. And she said to me, like, Bryan, that's all a load of BS. Like, you can launch already.
Just called you out.
She did. And, it's a kind of a little hack to surround yourself with people who will kind of point out the truth and aren't afraid to say some of those things. So anyway, I did get started with that. But then when I decided to rebrand to my personal brand at the beginning of 2016, I decided to use podcasting as my primary form of content. And the blogging scene was very saturated, and there weren't as many people podcasting back then. Even now, there's a ton more than there were at the time. But there were three primary reasons that I started it. The one was that I wanted to grow my own network and surround myself with people who inspired me. The second was that I wanted to ask some of these questions myself. I was kind of going through this stage at the same time. And the funny thing is, like, if you just reached out to someone online, let's say, I've interviewed Jenny Blake, who's obviously a huge figure in the online world, and she had Life After College, which was a big book dealing with like the 20-something space. And the way that I explain it to people now is, if you just reach out to someone with a profile that big, yeah, they might, they might be a cool person, but more often than not, it's going to look kind of like, well, why should I take an hour out of my day to speak to this person? A lot of these people are really busy. But as soon as you have a podcast behind it, you frame it from, hey, I've got a podcast, I'd love to share your message. Suddenly people become way more open to getting on a call. And so I got to ask some of these questions myself and share it with people who are going through the same thing at the same time, so that they could benefit from it. And then the third reason was that I didn't have to be the expert at everything that I was sharing. I could get people on who knew more about a topic than I did. For example, I've interviewed Stephanie O'Connell, who's a personal finance expert, and there's no way that I could speak to people, or nor would I want to give financial advice in the way that she could. So that's an example of how I could leverage other people's skills and abilities and be able to bring that all together in the podcast so that people listening could benefit from that. But pretty much, as the name suggests, quarter life comeback, I decided to play on the whole quarter life crisis term and give it a positive spin. And to me, the idea of a quarter life comeback is basically making the decision to choose you. And, it's about creating your own path in life and not feeling limited by what people tell you you can do or should do, but figuring out like what it is that you want to do and like what makes you happy, and then finding a way to pursue that. And that's what I try and inspire and empower people to do by listening to the show.
It's awesome. And that's one of the reasons I love doing these summits, because I get to do exactly what you said, connect with people like you and I may not have crossed paths if it hadn't been for this summit, but also picking people's brains who are much smarter than I am and have a lot more knowledge on the space. Stephanie's actually another speaker as well, and
I'm super pumped about that. She's amazing.
She's incredible. Go ahead.
And you said something now that I just want to kind of emphasize to people listening. You said that we would never have crossed paths, and you said might not have. I know for a fact we wouldn't have crossed paths if I didn't have a podcast or you didn't do what you're doing. And that's a key thing that I want to kind of emphasize and point out to people is when I started my podcast, I only knew about 2 or 3 of the people that I've interviewed. And I've interviewed almost 80 people now. And the way I gave a motivational speak at my school's sports awards recently, and the way that I explained it was, it's good to have a big vision. And, it's important to have something that you're working towards. And it's something that I do with clients is help them create a compelling vision that kind of pulls them forward. But at the same time, you can't be so narrow focused that all you're thinking about is that vision. Because if you do that, what you're going to do is exclude and kind of cut off all the opportunities that pop up along the way. And, by having this big vision and focusing just on the next step, you open yourself up to these opportunities that you could never have imagined before. And that's why I recently shared with my newsletter list, a mentor of mine, he had a guy working underneath him, kind of an apprentice. And this guy said, this guy's a real life ninja, which I think is so cool. But he said, step 2 kills dreams. And what he meant by that is, yes, you need to know what you're working towards. But if you get so caught up in thinking like, okay, but then I'm going to have to do this thing. Like, what am I going to do if that happens? If you're focusing on step 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and not just on step 1, you're going to get so caught up in your head that you're not going to take any action. And it's only when you take action that you get the clarity that you're looking for and that those opportunities pop up that you can never have imagined before. So I know we'll get into some takeaways that I've had and learn from people I've interviewed. But really, I can't emphasize enough the fact that you can't, if you're sitting here watching this today and you're dreaming of some different career path, you can't know all the opportunities that are going to pop up for you until you start moving towards what it is that you want. So even if it's like the tiniest action you can think of, just, reaching out to one of the people who are speaking in the summit, just the smallest thing you can think of, just start moving forwards, and things that you can't imagine right now are going to start happening.
And I can't emphasize that enough on my end. I think when people start thinking about steps 2 through 5 before working on one, it can be demotivating and demoralizing because you feel like there's so many different directions. Like the web gets so much bigger once you get a couple steps out. And then you think, oh, I could never do that. I don't have those skills, or I could never do this. I don't have any experience in it. But most of it starts with one step. Like my business started with writing a single blog post. And there was probably even a first step before that, but that's all I focused on. And I wasn't worried about, well, what happens when I need to send emails to people, or how am I going to make money, or how am I going to do X, Y, or Z, or do this summit. I was just focused on one thing. And I think it's funny. I'm sure you've experienced the same things, but if you just start taking action, a lot of opportunities that you would have never even thought of when you're thinking of steps 2 through 5, they just pop right up. And so totally. if you're just focused on step 1, and then you complete step 1, and then you start step 1 again towards the next thing, like you just stay on step 1 until it's complete, and then just keep looking at the next step right after that and no further. Like the opportunities will come, but it's a lot less stressful. It's a lot less anxiety inducing. And
yeah, there's 2 things I want to add there. The first is you need to accept that in the beginning, in all likelihood, you're going to suck. And if I listen to my first episodes, they sucked. Like I didn't even have this cool microphone that I'm speaking with now. I just used the audio on my laptop. But I think there's 2 things that separate the people that make it from the ones that don't. The first is being okay with sucking in the beginning, because the only way to get better is by sucking first, and then doing things so much that eventually you don't suck so much and you become pretty good at what you're doing. And then the other thing is just deciding that you're not going to stop. And there was an example that I wanted to point out of how we were speaking about opportunities popping up. And, this is a career focused summit, so it makes a lot of sense to bring this up. As I said, I didn't even, like when I quit my job 3 years ago, I hardly even knew what a podcast was. And in all fairness, podcasts were pretty new back then, and there weren't a ton of people doing it like they are today. And I hadn't even listened to a podcast before, and here I am hosting one 81 weeks in. And an example of these opportunities is I interviewed a mentor of mine, Jacob Sokol, and I got to this point now where I was, and there's a lot of examples like this, but I got to a point where I was looking to up my game and looking to hire a coach. And so I reached out to him because that's what he does. And I typed him an email, bearing in mind he's in New York and I was in Cape Town here in South Africa. So I'm 6 hours ahead. I typed him this email back in October 2016. And I basically asked him if he's still doing one-on-one coaching. And he replied to me, I swear on my life, not even 5 minutes later. And he said, dude, the universe must be playing jokes on us because I was just emailing you. And now bearing in mind, other than our interview, I'd never communicated with him. And I'd followed his work for like 2 or 3 years. So this was like a role model for me. And he's sending me this email. And he said he felt a really good connection on our podcast interview. And he wanted to know if I wanted to help him launch a program that he was running. So I told him that I had built my whole website and like pretty much everything you see of mine, I've created. And long story short, like we ended up working together for almost a year. And, that was like my core income for those months. And none of that would have happened if I just thought, I wonder what it would be like to start a podcast. And so that's just an example I wanted to share. You can't know these opportunities and relationships that are going to pop up unless you're actually taking action.
Agree 100%. And that's a fantastic example. I love it. Mm-hmm. You mentioned takeaways before from the guests that you've spoken to. So you've spoken to 80 guests with mm-hmm. incredible stories who have done incredible things. And I'd love to hear some of the takeaways that have really resonated with you, like the top 2 or 3 maybe. Mm-hmm. Would you mind sharing those?
Yeah. So I think what I'll do is I'll go through so for people watching, if you haven't listened to my podcast, I ask 3 questions at the end. The one is, what do you wish you'd been told in your 20s? The other is, what is the greatest opportunity for people in their 20s today? And the other one is, what one thing can people do to start, creating this quarter life comeback? And I think what'll be cool is if I share some of my favorites of what you wish had been told in your 20s, and then maybe a kind of overview and my favorite or my sort of biggest takeaway from interviewing all those people. So the ones that stand out to me, and there are a lot, but Jacob himself, he said that your 20s are about figuring out who you are and cultivating your knowledge of self. So your skills, your values, your strengths, your passions, and then building those skills and leveraging those activities. I interviewed Charlie Brenneman, he was a Spanish teacher, a high school Spanish teacher, and he became a mixed martial artist. He fought in the UFC. And he said, focus more on your preparation and forget about the outcome and the achievement. So it's, goals are really great, but it's not really about reaching the goal itself that makes goals effective. It's about who those goals force you to become, and the action you take as a result. I'm going to go through some quickly. I know you said 3, but I'm going to make them real quick. So yeah, Paul Angoni runs All Grown Up. And he said, success in your 20s is more about setting the table than enjoying the feast, which I think is a really cool analogy, on a really cool image. Let me see. I interviewed someone, her name is Ashley Taylor Yanello. She said, you can trial and error as much as you like. It's all going to work out in the end. Then Alison Cardi is a career coach. She said that things pass, and she thought she'd be stuck forever in, her kind of crisis. But what you're experiencing now is not forever, and you are going to change and grow. Another one, Hannah Beer, and there's just 2 left here. Hannah Beer, she said that, stop comparing yourself. And I think that's even a big part of the quarter life crisis today, is we live in this Instagram age where everyone's sharing their highlights reel and no one's showing the ugly backstory that goes into it. And so it gets so easy to compare your start with someone else's middle. Do
you use social media a lot?
I use it. I wouldn't say I use it a lot. I'm not a massive fan of Instagram stories, although I do get sucked into them and I do post as well. But I'm kind of a minimalist. So for me to broadcast what I'm doing all day, every day feels a little, it doesn't really feel congruent with me. And then I use tools to, batch social media and schedule in advance. And then I'll go in like once a day to kind of check notifications and connect with people.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to take you away from sharing. I feel like we could have 20-minute conversations on each of these takeaways. But the social media thing is interesting for me because it's topical. But I sort of felt the same way, and I think that was the toughest thing for me, especially when I was getting started. I would see it. First of all, you're so right. Especially Instagram it's a highlight reel, and you see people on vacation or at these fancy restaurants or whatever. And, you don't know the story behind that at all. And it could be like a family vacation, or it could be, somebody, they gave them a gift certificate or whatever, but they play it off as like, this is what I do. I'm always on these vacations. I'm always at these restaurants. And when I was starting out, especially I like to follow those motivational Instagrams or whatever back in the day with all the fancy pictures and the quotes or whatever. And you're like, everybody else seems to be leading this life except for me. Mm-hmm. And deep down, we all know that that's not really true, but it feels that way, and especially when you inundate yourself. So now, a couple of years later, I don't have the Facebook app on my phone. I've never had Snapchat. I don't have the Instagram app. I don't have Twitter. I don't have any social media on my phone. The only thing I do is check. I have LinkedIn actually because I kind of have to. But the only thing I check is Facebook online for my groups or whatever for Cultivated Culture. But I can't tell you the difference that it's made getting rid of those because I'm not wasting my time in it's a loop. You just get sucked in. It's like a black hole. You think you're going to look at like one post, and then 30 minutes later you're like, what have I been doing?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to intentionality. So if if you saw my phone, you would laugh at how basic I've made it. Actually, I'm going to pull it out. This will be fun.
Let's do it.
But as I'm speaking, a lot of it is about like knowing what it is that you're intending to do when you're going on social media, and not getting sucked into other things. So, for example, like you run groups for Cultivated Culture. No, like, okay, I'm going in to engage with the participants in my group, and then I'm getting off. So here's my phone. You'll see
wow.
there's no apps on the home screen.
That's amazing.
There's no apps. There's no pages of apps, so I can't scroll to any other apps. I'm getting a lot of glare here.
It's all good. I can see it perfect.
So I've got the phone, the messages, and then a folder with all my apps. So let me try and zoom in there.
Yeah, that works.
There we go.
What languages are you learning?
When I got back from Spain, I kind of fell in love with Spanish culture, and so I'm keen to learn Spanish.
Nice.
But yeah, I've kind of dummied my smartphone, so it's now my dumb phone, and I put in as many environmental blocks as I can. But yeah, man, in July when I went to Spain, I basically took the whole month off of social media, and it was amazing. Mm-hmm. You kind of appreciate the things around you a lot more and notice things around you. And then, so the last little takeaway I wanted to share here was from Paul Sohn, and he runs a site called Cara, which is specifically for people in their 20s and 30s. And he said, take it slow. Life doesn't end in your 20s. And he said he was so impatient and focused on climbing the corporate ladder that he missed the opportunity to build relationships with people outside of work. And, he said there's a lot more to your life than just your career, which is important for people watching this too. But I think my biggest takeaways and my favorite episode was actually with an older guest. His name was Tom Asacker. And there's a lot of talk about passion and purpose in our generation, and especially in the career space and finding the job you love. And what Tom said, which I keep coming back to again and again, is that your passion isn't out there, it's in here. And what he meant by that is you can sit and try and brainstorm or think, what is my passion? What am I passionate about? But unless you're getting onto the playing field and actually taking action and then noticing how things feel inside, you're not going to get really good feedback like you would if you were trying things. And so my biggest advice to people, especially if you're in a job and you don't want to just jump ship like I did, which I don't recommend, and you want to maybe start something on the side, experiment with something that interests you. And I've got a free ebook all about self-awareness, and there's some activities there to kind of explore some of these things a little deeper. But pretty much what everyone comes back to is finding the intersection between what it is that you're passionate about, what it is that, and there I use that word again, but things you really enjoy doing, things you did when you were younger. So it's that side, and then it's things that you're good at, and then things that people need or that people would pay for. And if you can find a way to combine all three of those, you're going to hit a sweet spot. And what I would then do is, once you know those areas, find things that satisfy all three of those and experiment with them as a side project while you're still working your job. So if, let's say, for example, you think you might want to host a podcast, give yourself a deadline. Let's say I'm going to, for the next 90 days, while I'm in my job, I'm going to launch a podcast and give it 90 days. And if at the end of the 90 days, it's not really as exciting as I thought it would be, or I don't see any opportunity to turn this into a career, then give yourself permission to quit. There's so much stigma against giving up and quitting, but I think done in the right time and place, quitting is really helpful because it gives you data points of okay, this didn't work. Where do I need to go here now? And then you pick a different thing to explore. So make it a project, give it a timeline, reevaluate at the end of the timeline, but stick to that timeline and don't give up along the way before you've got enough feedback. And then my biggest, I think if I had a tattoo, well, I actually do have a tattoo, but if I had, I think Robin Sharma is a big role model of mine, and he talks about brain tattoos. And I think if I could give any advice to someone, it's just get started. Just if you have an idea for something, just find the smallest action step you can take to experiment and explore if that's something you actually want to do. And if you're feeling overwhelmed and confused or stuck, it's because your next step is too big and you need to make a smaller next step. So there's no next step that's too small. Get out there if there's something that interests you, experiment with it before you quit your day job. And then, the other side of this is there's nothing wrong with doing something you're passionate about just as a hobby. I think that's another thing that and maybe we'll get into this with like misconceptions about the whole like purpose and quarter life comeback stuff. But there's this huge kind of push to do something that you love and, monetize and all that kind of stuff. But we've kind of lost the pure joy of doing things just for the fact that we like them and doing them as a hobby. If I want to learn Spanish, I don't have to now like find a way to set up a course to teach other people how to speak Spanish. I can just do it because maybe I really just like learning Spanish. So don't feel the pressure to monetize absolutely everything that you're passionate about.
Fantastic advice all around. And the theme, if I had to pick one of every session that we've done throughout the summit, it's get started. And I love that because so many people come to me and they say, you have great advice. I really enjoyed reading it. It opened up my eyes, but I have no idea what I want to do. So what am I supposed to do then? And a lot of people, when I have that conversation with them and I dig deeper, they do exactly what you said. They're sitting there and they're waiting for like a dream to come to them one night. And then they wake up and they're like, holy shit, this is what I've meant to do. But that's not going to happen, one. And you're never going to know what you want to do unless you get out there and you start trying things. And I think people are really, really afraid of wasting time. So trying something and failing and saying, you know what, I just wasted 3 months of my life that I'll never get back. Why did I even try that? And I think that that's the total wrong way to think about it for a couple reasons. First, I personally found, I don't know if you feel the same way, but all of the stuff that I did that I thought was a waste of time at the time, when it came to personal growth and trying new things and stepping out of my comfort zone, all of those things came back around to be helpful later on. And then on top of that, I learned a lot about what I didn't want to do. And that's so important when you're trying to figure out what you do want to do, because some things look like really, really fun and easy and nice on the outside. And then when you dig into them, it's a totally different story. So I'm so glad that you shared that advice. I think it's fantastic. And I love the deadline piece. Give yourself 90 days, give yourself permission to quit. Give it your best effort, though. Really get after it for 90 days. And if it doesn't work out, then you know that that's not for you. You learn that about yourself, and then you can go find something. You can try something new that you might like.
Yeah, and I was talking to a client about this the other day. Actually, it wasn't a client. It was just someone I got on a call with. And I said to him, he's just quit his job recently. And I said to him, like, really, really high paying job, but he wants to be self-employed. And I said to him, how long have you been self-employed now? And he said 2 months. And I said to him, okay, and how has that been? Has it felt like pretty fast? And he said, yeah, it feels like yesterday I quit my job. And I said to him, how would you be feeling now? He felt a bit stuck, like he wasn't quite sure what he wants to do. And I said to him, how do you think you'd be feeling now if instead of exploring all these different options that you're interested in from the time you quit, if for these last 2 months and the next month after it, so 3 months, you just focused on one thing and given it everything you can before moving on to the next thing? And it was, that for him, that helped a lot. And the point that I was making is that 3 months, it feels like a long time. Like, wow, I've got to commit the next 3 months of my life to just trying this thing. 3 months goes by before you even know it. And, if you look back 3 months ago, it was like, June? That feels like it was really long, really, really short. But if for these last 3 months you'd given something a good go, who knows where you might have been now. But the good news is you've got another 3 months and another 3 after that, another 3 after that. Definitely.
And I'd argue that thinking about month 3 or even month 2 might be step 2 or step 3, going back to what we talked about earlier. Instead, know that you're going to give yourself 90 days, but focus on the week ahead of you, the next 7 days. What are you going to do over the next 7 days? That's going to be step 1. And then focus, take it week by week or even day by day, but just know that at the 90-day mark, that's when you're going to assess and say, this is for me, this isn't for me, it's time to move on to something else. So thanks so much, Bryan. This has been fantastic. Before we go, I usually ask people what their number one piece of advice is. We've gotten a lot of advice. What do you think is the biggest misconception out there when it comes to your quarter life comeback and creating your own path?
And I've had a lot of fun doing this. I can't believe we're coming up on time already. I think the biggest misconception is if someone's going through this thing that we've called the quarter life crisis, there's this tendency to think that we're the only ones going through it and that there's something wrong with us for feeling this way. And what I just want to leave people with is that this is a normal part of being at a point in your life where suddenly you are responsible for all the decisions. There's not a school telling you that these are the times you need to be in class. There's not your parents saying like, here's some pocket money for the month. Suddenly we're in control of all aspects of our lives. And that's going to lead to some overwhelm. And that's like perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. And just know that pretty much everyone around you is feeling the same way. So I would try and reframe it from a crisis to not even a comeback yet, but a challenge, and see it as a way to test what you're capable of, and just bring it on. There's so many options available to us that weren't to previous generations, which makes our unique situation even more challenging. We could, do I become famous on Instagram, or do I become a YouTube celebrity, or do I, we're in a time now where you can start a freelance business for basically free and live a better lifestyle than someone who's working in a 9-to-5 and hating their job. And all those things, it's just more and more options, and that increases the overwhelm. And then the other thing that I want to just kind of leave people with here is, it's especially if we're in the social media circles and we see people like hustling and crushing it and all those other buzzwords. There's nothing wrong with being in a 9-to-5. If that's what you feel is your calling and what you're passionate about, the world needs lawyers, the world needs accountants, the world needs every other profession that we've got. The world needs doctors. You're not a failure if you're not self-employed. And I think that's a dangerous trap that a lot of people fall into, is they think that they're not making a success of their lives if they're not like sitting on the beach with their laptop working 4 hours a week. But it just starts with self-awareness and being aware of what are your strengths and your passions and your abilities and your interests, and deciding what kind of lifestyle it is that you want to create, whether that's a 9-to-5 or as a self-employed entrepreneur, and then just taking that next small step like we mentioned.
Awesome, Bryan. Fantastic advice. Thank you so much for taking the time. Where can we find you online?
I'm lucky enough where my name is pretty normal to say, but uncommon enough to have my domain name and my handles everywhere. So it's bryanteare.com is pretty much the home for everything I'm doing, and that's BRYANTEARE. And across social media, when I go on there, it's at Bryan Teare on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook mainly. But Austin, this has been a lot of fun. And if people have enjoyed this and they, are interested in the self-awareness stuff that we spoke about, then I do have a free ebook, and you can find that at bryanteare.com/self-awareness ebook. And I'll maybe create a unique link. So let's say bryanteare.com/VCS. And you can find it there. It's not a long ebook that's going to take you, a month to read. There's 6 exercises, journaling exercises, just asking you some kind of prompting questions to get you thinking about some of the stuff we spoke about today.
Awesome. I love it. We'll throw links to all that below the video here, so it's easy for people to find. But Bryan, thank you so much again for taking the time. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Austin.
Bye.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And a big thanks to Austin once again for having me on the summit. I highly recommend you check that out. And if you enjoyed this episode, shoot me a tweet at Bryan Teare to let me know your biggest takeaway. I'm not going to give a takeaway this week, but instead I'm going to urge you to go and check out the Virtual Career Mastery Summit, and you can find that at bryanteare.com/VCM, or make sure you head on over to the show notes, as always, which you can find at bryanteare.com/086 for the show notes for this episode. And I'll also throw in all the other links and resources we mentioned in the interview. As always, please head over to quarterlifecomeback.com and make sure you subscribe to the show to get all these episodes and more resources as soon as they go live. We're on 86 episodes, and there is no stopping before we get to that magical 100 mark. So I'd love to have you part of the journey. And speaking of being part of the journey, check out the Facebook group, the private mastermind that we do have going on there. That's at bryanteare.com/FB group. And you can come and hang out with us behind the scenes and just share some tips and strategies and hacks for doing things a little bit more efficiently and effectively. Thank you so much for being with me again. It's an honor and a privilege, and I really appreciate the time every single week and all the emails of support. And until next week, keep creating your quarter life comeback.